Okay, good morning and welcome to the Healthy Aging Core webinar, How to Support Healthy Aging for LGBTQ2 plus seniors. My name is Barbara McMillan and I'm Provincial Community Engagement Coordinator for the United Way's Population Health Team. I'd like to begin by recognizing that we're speaking today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And this is a provincial webinar with participants from all over the province. We also acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of all First Nations of British Columbia, on which we gratefully work and gather. As of yesterday, we had 113 people registered for the webinar, so we're thrilled at the interest in this topic. So with that number of people to manage the session and to ensure good audio and visual quality, there's a few details that we need to point out. Everyone will be muted with cameras off, except for the presenters, of course, and you'll be prompted to respond to some questions during the presentation, where you can respond with comments in the chat box. So you should all see it there at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure that you do use the chat box for this and not the question and answer area, because that's just for questions that we'll deal with at the end of the presentation. And then for those questions that we'll deal with at the end, you can post them anytime, but the 10-minute question period will be at the very end after the presentation. This webinar is a little bit longer than most. Usually we just go for 1 hour, but we're doing 75 minutes to make sure that we can go into the depth that is needed and to also have time for questions. So we'll be running to 11:15 today. The webinar is being recorded, so if you do have to miss parts of it or want to refer back to it at any point, it will be posted on Healthy Aging Core along with the slides in the next day or two. And you can easily find it by doing a search for the title of the webinar or by just typing in webinar, and all of our webinars will come up. So you might want to refer to some of those other ones as well. Also, following the webinar, all participants will be sent a brief survey to provide feedback to us. And we really hope that you'll take the time to let us know what you think. So our presenters this morning are Nicole Tremblay, who is the clinical social work educator with Seniors Health of Island Health, and Jane Osbourne, the regional mentor for Central and North Vancouver Island, and also with BC Community Response Networks, volunteer facilitator, and Restorative Justice Victoria, as well as a few other roles that I know of. So I'm just going to take a minute to go into more detail introducing Jane, and Jane is going to introduce Nicole. But for Jane, who is a member of our Community-Based Seniors Services Leadership Council, so I've got to know her over the last couple of years. But some things I didn't know, that after a 30-year career in information tech management and organizational development, she retired to explore the joys of working in community and all of its diversity. Over the past 20+ years, Jane's focused her energies on project and volunteer work, both provincially and locally, initially on Vancouver's North Shore and Sea to Sky corridor, and more recently on Vancouver Island as a passionate advocate for social justice. For the past 6 years, she's been the Community Response Network's regional mentor for North and Central Island, which takes her from Malahat to the top of the island and out to both coasts, and includes the islands scattered throughout and around the coast, as well as isolated communities on the mainland coast. So a lot of area to cover. The realities of geographic area that covers urban, rural, and very remote boat or flying communities has brought her a new realization. Jane no longer calls herself a community developer. She says, I don't develop communities, they develop themselves, and I do my best to support them in doing that safely for all their residents. Her mandate is tied to prevention and early intervention of adult abuse and neglect, and she's a community supporter. Jane says, I'm passionate about inclusive and affirming responses for all members of our communities. A restorative justice and more recently an anti-racism and reconciliation lens allows me to explore and understand my own privilege and my personal history and bring my whole person to the process of designing and supporting healing responses to crime and conflict. It facilitates development of my skills as an ally in community work with First Nations, recent immigrants, and other marginalized minorities. So as part of Jane's role on the CBSS Leadership Council, Jane's focused her energies on rural and remote communities and on the LGBTQ2+ population within them. and this is what brings her here today. So over to you, Jane.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Thank you very much, Barb. I want to just say that I am a 6th generation white settler, and I'm endeavoring to throw off the shackles of the colonial world I'm a product of. So at present, I'm living as an uninvited guest on the unceded territories of the Snuneymuxw and Snuneymuxw nations. I work, across a wide geography that includes Nuchalnuth, Kwakwaka'wakw, and Coast Salish First Nations. So I'm here to introduce our featured presenter, and I just have titled this little introduction, Jane Meets Nicole Tremblay, and the rest is history. And you will realize the truth soon. Back in February 2016, Dr. Gloria Gutman from SFU's Gerontology Research Center did a series of town halls to introduce a project that delivered a set of videos and posters designed to raise awareness about address elder abuse in the LGBTQ community. And one of those town halls was in Victoria. From both the Health Authority and the BC Community Response Network perspective, it was a command performance. That means that Gloria is on the board of BCCRN, and health authorities are a designated agency for responding under our adult guardianship legislation. At the last moment, my South Island colleague was unable to get to the town hall, and I was tapped on the shoulder. And I came down to Victoria, where Nicole, who was representing VHA, was there. And let me clarify, that should be Island Health that I should be saying now. So in other words, this whole thing was an accident, and I just want you to know that. I arrived early to set up. Once I was clear on what I thought I might be doing, I wandered around the hall, and in due course, I found myself talking to my colleague, Nicole. And at that time, I did not know anything about Nicole, but what I recall myself saying, because this is in advance of the presentation, is, I really don't know what I'm doing here. This isn't my thing. And I don't even know what I might have added to that, but I find it a funny statement, because when you say that kind of thing, fate takes over, and that's exactly what had happened. So here we are. Let me introduce you to Nicole. I was later to find out that she's a social worker with 25 years experience working with individuals and families across their lifespan. She's much more credentialed than I will ever be or could ever hope to be, with master's degrees in social work and in public administration. Currently, she's a clinical educator with Senior Strategy, working to enhance mental health and substance use services for seniors. So that was really in the pocket for the town hall that we were both at. So, here I am. I've met this person. I go through this this whole thing, and I actually leave that day thinking, oh, good, that's over. I'm glad, and I go back to my cozy little Nanaimo, home and get on with my work. But at some point, this niggling thing went on in my brain saying, this isn't enough. I need to do something about this. So, and I also thought, hey, I am the most appropriate person in BCCRN to begin this work, because that time I was the only queer person on amongst our regional mentors. We've since had others. And so I thought, okay, this is something I need to take on. And the funny thing was that somewhere in the background, when I wasn't seeing Nicole or communicating with her, she was thinking the same thing, in terms of her life in Island Health and the many, many services that they deliver. So the upshot is we both started projects. And mine was on the community side, hers on the health authority side. And there were 2 brochures out on the streets at that time that we didn't really, I have to say, we didn't coordinate. This is the Seniors Aging Out one, which used one acronym for LGBTQ, and Nicole produced something called Who Are LGBTQ2 plus Seniors on the health side. And that is a great question, because I have to say that was, January 2017 or thereabouts? And it's been 3.5 years, and I still don't know the full answer to that question. So here we are. as a symbol of working together, I am wearing, yes, the Island Health badge holder rainbow thing. I only wear it on occasions like this, or if I'm speaking to the Island Health Board or management. But I think what it says and the work that we've done together really represents the power of community and health working together. And so I'm going to leave it at that and just turn you over to your very excellent, featured presenter, Nicole Tremblay from Island Health. And I'm so happy that we are actually here doing this webinar. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the United Way and Barb for the invitation and the interest in exploring this topic a little bit more. It's something near and dear to my heart, and my collaboration with Jane has been a joy, really, and I think a really good example of how health authorities and communities can work together to support and enhance and expand in a coordinated way the kind of services that we want to deliver. So I, again, really value and appreciate Jane as well. So my acknowledgements are a thoughtful process that I try to go through each and every time so it doesn't become rote or routine. And the acknowledgements for me are about being a white settler and being on the land of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations and these Lekwungen speaking people. And I continue to figure out what that means because I think that while we can say those things, actually understanding and embodying those values and ways of being is our ongoing work. My other acknowledgement is that this work continues to still make me I maybe have moved on from anxiety. I mean, but it gives me pause to think about speaking the truth and what does that mean? And the invitation for each of us to speak our truth even when our voice shakes, and to be able to recognize when we do have power, how we use that power, and that showing up in an authentic way and building relationships is really the core foundation of any kind of meaningful work that we do. So this is my acknowledgement that even though a lot has changed in the last 50 years, and I did turn 50 this year, that, there's a lot of work that we still need to continue to do. So my invitation to all of you is to recognize your truth and continue to speak it as we all evolve on a number of social issues. So hoping that in our brief time today, our learning objectives, and I use that word loosely, are really to increase your awareness of just what are the lived experiences of LGBTQ2S+ seniors been. And I will go through that terminology in a minute because I know that language is ever evolving and complex. So be able to use those terms accurately as they exist in this moment, because as I said, they continue to change and evolve. And just take a pause and reflect on some of the assumptions and belief systems that you may be carrying that you're not even aware that you're carrying. And the last is just to be slightly better equipped to provide more inclusive services to whomever, in whatever service program, residential care site, whatever program that you work in, that you're just a little bit more aware and able to offer inclusive services to LGBT seniors. So why did I start this? Well, Jane has talked about some of our early collaboration and some kind of alignment of the stars, I think, that really prompted this project and then this initiative. But from my experience, I started seeing more and more reports coming across my desk, coming into my social media feed about the degree of anxiety that LGBTQ2S+ seniors were feeling about aging and needing to interact more with the healthcare system. And whether that be going into long-term care or having people come into their care homes, or just as we age, we oftentimes, have more chronic illnesses and interactions with the healthcare system. And there was a significant degree of anxiety that this population was feeling. So that prompted me to look around our organization and see, well, what are we doing to recognize and respond to the needs of LGBTQ2S+ seniors? And the answer was very little. And unfortunately, we are certainly not unique as a health authority or health or social service provider in failing to recognize that LGBTQ2S+ seniors exist in our programs and how their care needs might look a little bit different. So that started our journey, and my focus has primarily been so far in residential care, because that was the program or service area that seniors were feeling the most anxious about, obviously, because that's their home, and the vulnerability that goes with being dependent on others for care. So that's where we started, but we have certainly branched out into other community providers and other social service groups, because LGBTQ2S+ seniors are everywhere. So, quick note about the terminology. And what was interesting to me is I actually went to it was more of a community meeting, community presentation around LGBTQ2S+ seniors, and there was a higher proportion of actual LGBTQ2S+ seniors in the part that were in the audience than is usual in presentations. And we spent probably 80% of the time just talking about terminology. So the presenter didn't even get through the number of slides that she had and the types of information she wanted to cover, because we got, and I don't want to use the word stuck, but we stayed here for a long period of time. And I've thought about that lately or recently and why that was. And I think it's because these aren't just words. This terminology is about identity, it's about visibility, it's about recognition, and that's why the language in this community continues to evolve as people grapple with identities and what that means and try to be able to represent themselves in a way that is recognizable and visible. So lesbian and gay bisexual, people probably know what that means. Transgender and cisgender are flip sides of the same coin. So a cisgender person is somebody whose felt sense of their gender identity matches their external appearance. So the sex they were assigned at birth, you have a penis, you are male, you have a vagina, you are female. So people for whom that sense of gender identity matches their physical self, those people are cisgender. Transgender is more of an umbrella term that really includes a lot of people who don't necessarily ascribe to traditional gender binary norms. So we'll revisit this a little bit, because I know for some people, there is an understanding that somebody might be born in a male body but feel like they're a woman, and so that sort of transition. But that idea of binary gender identity is being rejected by a lot of younger people, particularly in society, who are rejecting the idea that there are only male and female gender identities possible. So it really refers to people along the gender identity spectrum. Queer is a word that one needs to be a little bit careful using around LGBTQ2S older adults, because for a lot of years it was a really negative term. Jane has adopted it and feels comfortable with it. I would not identify that way. I would identify myself as lesbian. So, that's why it's really important that we don't necessarily make assumptions about how somebody presents or describes themselves, but that we make space for them to show up and identify themselves in whatever way is comfortable for them. Two-spirit is a term that is only to be used by Indigenous people, and it's a term that came out of a meeting, I think it was in the 80s, maybe the 90s. I have to go back and refresh my memory on that, but in Canada, there was a gathering of Indigenous people for North America, and a lot of Indigenous peoples in history have used different words to describe people who don't ascribe to gender binaries. So that sense of two-spirit being having a male and female identity in your body, or it can also be used to describe a sexual orientation. But the important thing is that this is two-spirit is an identity that oftentimes also includes some social and cultural roles and responsibilities within a nation or within within a band or a tribe. So it's important that you understand what it is. And I think that it's, again, not every Indigenous person who's gay may identify as two-spirit, but again, just to be familiar with these terms and to be interested and open to understanding how that person identifies. Intersex is a term that's used to describe people who were traditionally have some sort of ambiguous genitalia, or you may have heard the term hermaphrodite. That's an outdated term, but that's the same sort of ideology that, there's not a clearly identifiable sex to be assigned at birth. And you may hear other terms like gender queer, gender variant, gender creative. So there's all sorts of different terminology used to describe the way that people are showing up with their gender identity these days. If you may have questions about that, just please hold on to them and we'll address them at the end, because I know I certainly haven't addressed the full range of terminology used, but those are kind of the basic core concepts. This is interesting. It's the Trans Student Educational Resource Center came up with this gender unicorn to more fully break down some of these complex components of identity. So you may have heard of the genderbread man or genderbread person, sorry, whoops. But this is a one step beyond to really break down, as I said, gender identity, which is that felt sense of who you are, the gender expression piece, which is how you show up and communicate your gender every day. And it can be things like how they're short, how long you wear your hair, whether or not you wear makeup, the kind of clothing you wear, the way you walk, the things you do, all of those things that we don't necessarily think about if you haven't really questioned your gender identity or expression. It may not be something you've spent a lot of time thinking about, but for people who don't fall into those traditional binary categories, oftentimes this is something that people have spent a lot of time thinking about, who they are and how they show up. So sex assigned at birth is also a term that you may or may not be familiar with, but a lot of folks in the trans communities use that to describe the process of being given a gender when they were born, rather than being able to experience, unravel, uncover their sense of their own sexual or gender identity. And then with regard to sexual orientation, there's a further breakdown about whether or not you can be physically attracted to or emotionally attracted to somebody. So you can see how really when we're unpacking each element of those aspects of our identity, it can look different. So I've given each of you, or you were forwarded, I understand, a blank version that you may color in, just to spend, it's an invitation to spend a little bit of time thinking about your gender identity, thinking about your gender expression, and thinking about who you're physically or sexually or emotionally attracted to. And again, even if these things feel relatively unanalyzed for you or unexamined, my invitation is to spend a little bit of time and just do that. So this person, for example, gender identity is female, gender expression is generally more feminine, but has some components of a masculine or other gender expression, physically attracted to women, emotionally attracted to women. But just fill out your own and have a little think about that. Okay, so this image is a composite of some of the history that LGBTQ2S+ seniors have experienced. And when you think about if somebody was born in 1950, that means they're 70 right now. And so things have changed a lot over the course of their life. But as that person was developing their sense of value and worth and identity and who they were in the world was a very different place in the 50s and 60s and 70s in some ways. For example, for those of you who take a look at the image around AIDS isn't a disease, it's a cure, that is such a jarring image to see, but for people who went through the AIDS crisis and were exposed to the degree of hate and vitriol, that is a lasting experience within society and within the healthcare system as well. This little number up here is a ECT machine. So there are some LGBTQ2S+ folks who were involuntarily hospitalized in the 40s, 50s, and even into the 60s, and received lots of horrendous treatments to try to cure them of their disease. And homosexuality was considered a disease up until 1969. So again, we're not talking in the hugely distant past. And then this machine in the bottom left-hand corner was called the fruit machine, and it was developed in the 50s and 60s and used by the RCMP in Canada to try to ferret out and fire or dismiss members of the military who were LGBT, people who were part of the federal public service, and so there was thousands of LGBTQ2S plus folks who were dismissed and fired and marginalized from the federal government organizations. So this is our history in Canada, and even now there are multiple examples of rainbow crosswalks being defaced or services being denied to LGBTQ2S plus people. So they were told over the course of their lives that they were mentally ill, criminalized, immoral, perverted, the national security risk, and a threat to the family. And so juxtaposing LGBTQ2S plus people as threats to families and to children has been a really damaging experience as well. So that's sort of the history that people are coming into services with and coming into your organizations with. And so I would invite you again to dig a little bit more into the experiences of LGBT seniors, because I think it's tempting to look at ourselves in Canada and think that maybe things have evolved to the point where we don't need to be concerned, or there's no reason to be fearful anymore, but we need to consider people's lived experiences also up to this point. So that's, and this is a interesting CBC News special that was looking specifically at fears around discrimination. And I think sometimes it's really powerful to hear the stories of LGBT people in Canada and hear some of their experiences to date. So I'm going to press play on that and we'll have a little listen.
My name, well, David Bisdell. And who am I? Well, I'm an older gay man. I'm having a hard time, I guess, making that transition from being young to being old. When I'm dreaming, I'm young. In my dreams, I'm young.
When you look in the mirror, what do you see?
I see an old man. I see somebody that I didn't want to become. I'm not afraid of dying. What I'm afraid of is the time from now until the time that I do die. And the way I see it right now, going into a senior's home, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be any fun.
I mean, do you worry that people might treat you differently because you're gay?
I do. And I think it would be unjustified.
What is the worry?
Isolation. That they won't accept me.
Imagine feeling that at the end of your life. Now, one of the problems, and seniors will tell you this, is that you become more and more invisible as you age. That's why Leslie Lee Camp does whatever she can to be seen.
I'm a very proud queer dyke, as you can see. I wear my dyke t-shirt proudly. And this is my buddy Lily, who goes everywhere with me, especially, I want to show you, on the dance floor.
Leslie is a youthful 64, and one of the things Lily, her cane, does for her is remind Leslie of the time she spent in a Toronto rehab hospital a couple of years ago.
This one nurse came in and said to me, "Look at you, you're a mess. It's bad enough that you're one of those, and now I have to come and clean you up." And it was humiliating because I had no control and I had to totally depend on her. And for the whole time she was cleaning me, she kept making homophobic remarks. Kept saying, you know, you don't have a husband, you don't have children, where do you think you're going to go in life? It's bringing tears to my eyes just thinking about it. If I'm there for good health care, it shouldn't matter who I am, right? What my sexual orientation is. That shouldn't matter when you're providing me health care.
Listening to Leslie, I can't help but wonder, why aren't LGBT seniors protesting? Well, Leslie points out that it wasn't until 1969 that it was even legal to be gay in this country. So if you're 70 years old today, you remember that.
Many of us are afraid because we have been so stigmatized for so many years at this age. Those of us who are 55 and 60 plus are still afraid to speak out. We are people just like everybody else, but we have led such stressful lives, and some of us still do. We don't have the support systems that straight seniors have in place, and that's why we are going back into the closet.
After struggling to come out, LGBT seniors get to the end of their lives and face a horrible choice.
We are having to decide whether we want to come out and be our whole selves, or we want to get good health care.
Would you ever go back into the closet?
Never. Never. Nope. It's going to be a fight to the end.
But here's the thing. Leslie's not fighting by herself.
Over the years, many of people in our LGBT community have been wounded. They've been wounded because they've been discriminated against.
That's Brian Hobbs. He's 69, retired, and his passion today is to make people aware of the discrimination that LGBT seniors face going into care.
They might not feel welcome.
Everyone in this seminar either works or volunteers with seniors.
Or they might feel threatened to come here and be part of things. Or they might hide. They might pretend to be straight and they're not. Here at,
The reason Brian does this is deeply personal. And it actually starts way back in high school, when he was left to eat alone in the cafeteria every day.
Nobody looked at me, not even the teachers. They'd walk past, and it's like I didn't exist. What if the same thing happened in a residence? What if people didn't welcome me at their table? What if I was the one who sat alone at a table in the corner of the room at 79? So that happened to me when I was a teenager, but I sure don't want it to happen again when I'm a senior and in care.
In the seminar, to help workers understand that fear, Brian uses an anecdote that happened just a few months ago.
So again, I had some friends who were an elderly gay couple around 80 years old, and eventually one of them became ill and had to be placed in a long-term care facility. And one of the things they asked me was that, could you stand in the doorway? And if a personal service worker or a nurse would go by, signal us, because we don't want to be seen holding hands or embracing, on the bed. Because they were afraid if the nurses caught them doing that, they would discriminate against them. People sometimes say to us, okay, so what do you gays want? And what we want is to be treated with the same dignity and respect and kindness that is accorded to everybody else. Nothing more than that, but nothing less. So thank you for listening.
Brian's hope is pretty simple, that LGBT seniors can be whoever they want to be when they go into long-term care. Would you ever go back into the closet?
No. I'd just be who I am. I'm not flamboyant. I'm not one that I don't think I'm one that you can pick out on the street and say he's a fag. I just feel normal, except that I'm gay.
The seniors who are facing what David's up against are the same seniors who fought for gay rights for all generations. It seems only fair. They should live how they want in their final years. Nick Purdon, CBC News, Toronto.
And this issue may only get...
So here's where, when we get to be in person, we can have a juicy conversation about people's responses and reactions. But I would invite you in your small groups, if you're watching with other people after this webinar is over, just to talk about how that video impacted you, the things that you learned about it. One of the things that always strikes me is just around the issue of visibility and inclusion. And each of those older adults talked about the pain and the concern that they had over being excluded, about being seen. Our friend at the end saying, I don't think I'm visible, and that's been a huge issue for LGBT seniors over the years. It has been safety, being invisible, but there's a cost to our sense of belonging and inclusion when we choose to be invisible, despite, oh, so there's a wasp in my office. Sorry. Hopefully it won't sting me. I'm not allergic. Anyway, so I did want to also tell you about, and there is a reference in the reference sheet that I believe you are also forwarded. It's got some valuable websites and all of the videos that I'll be showing as well. There's one more that I want to draw your attention to, but there's some wonderful resources to help people better understand issues around how you create a more safe and welcoming environment. So we will touch on those a little bit later as well. But the community piece of research that I want to draw your attention to now was a piece of research that was conducted, I believe it was 2 years ago now, and they had a volunteer go out into every long-term care facility in White Rock, BC, and ask how many queer, trans, LGBT, or LGBTQ2+ seniors they had in their care facility. And the response across the entire community of White Rock, BC was 0. And we know statistically that that is impossible, not true. And in fact, LGBTQ2+ seniors are more likely to be in long-term care facilities or needing additional formal supports from health and social care systems because they don't have those informal networks of care that one of the participants in the video was referring to, because they oftentimes do not have children. They do not have necessarily good relationships with their nuclear or extended family members. So that's just also something to keep in mind. So visibility and invisibility is something that is a bit of a different issue, because people can choose to be visible or not visible, whereas other issues like, race, for example, are much more immediately obvious. So we've come to the fact or fiction portion of our webinar presentation. And for those of you who have your chat function box opened, can just pipe in and decide whether or not you think this is a fact or fiction. So, since seniors don't have sex anymore, their sexual orientation isn't important to their care. True or false? I see falses coming in. Absolutely, it is false. For 2 reasons. One, seniors' desire for intimacy and sexual contact can remain well into their 80s and 90s. So we need to not make assumptions that just because somebody is older, that means they have no interest in intimacy or sexual contact anymore. The second and equally important piece is that sexual orientation and sexual behavior are not the same thing. So we continue to have a sexual orientation, even if we are not actively currently engaged in sexual relationship. And I've tried over the years to really think about how to help people understand the fact that those 2 things are separate, and how our sexual orientation continues to be an important part of who we are and how we live and experience the world, just by thinking about if you happen to not live in the country in which you were born and raised, you still have an affinity for that culture, that food, that way, the songs, the traditions of that culture, even though you don't live there anymore. So it's just something to, again, be mindful of, because I think we have in our society a propensity to absolutely desexualize older adults. And if there is this even unconscious separation between, so thinking that if somebody isn't having sex, they're not a sexual being, that their sexual orientation doesn't matter. And just my invitation to remember that indeed it does. All right, fact or fiction? LGBTQ2+ seniors have the same needs as other patients, clients, residents. Fact or fiction? You're all saying fact, and I would agree. This is a bit of a trick question. Sometimes people say fiction because there is a recognition that there certainly are some differences potentially between heteronormative and heterosexual seniors, and the unique experiences and care needs of LGBTQ2+ seniors. So yes, in general, they do have the same needs, but how we recognize, understand, and respond to those needs might look different. So for example, everybody would have a need for safety, but the way that we attend to and are aware of and create the conditions for safety might look a little bit different. Now, I'm adding the x-ray of the transgender elbow a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it also does arise from the very real experience for trans folks that sometimes they have difficulty getting healthcare needs met that don't relate to their transgender identity or status. And so they have had experiences of being rejected or denied care that has nothing to do with their trans status because they were a trans person. So this is something that we need to continue to be aware of and challenge when we see it, because a lot of the kinds of care needs and healthcare needs are the same. So we absolutely need to make sure that we are offering the full scope of services for people, but keeping in mind how those needs might look a little bit different. So what is person-centered care? This is a term that I'm sure that many of you have as a central tenet of the way that you provide care in your organization or health authority. But because all our residents are not the same, we cannot treat them all the same. It is really making sure that people are involved in the process of planning their care or planning whatever service they are getting from your organization. And it's about knowing and respecting who that person is. So if we don't know and understand who that person is and what their lived experiences have been and what their care needs look like, then we're not going to be able to provide person-centered care. Because one of the things that I have encountered in our healthcare system and other places that I've worked with is this belief that we just need to treat everybody the same. And it gets a little bit confusing because sometimes, as you'll hear Brian on our video clip, asking to be treated the same, with the same kind of respect. But that doesn't mean that we don't understand who they are. So equity and equality are concepts that have a little bit different premise. I mean, equity means everybody gets the same. Equality means that people are getting what they need according to who they are. So that patient-centered care, that person-centered care approach requires that we know who the person is, and that means gender identity and sexual orientation as well. So one point, though, I do want to make is that we've had lots of discussions around whether or not we ask somebody their sexual orientation or gender identity when they come into a service. And that's a tricky one. Generally, I did some focus groups early on in this process and asked the LGBTQ2+ seniors how they would respond or feel if they entered into a service or program and were asked that question. And there was a lot of wariness. Why do you want to know? How's this going to affect my care? Who else is going to know? What are you going to do with the information? And so generally, I think that we need to invite people to share with us who they are in a safe and inclusive way. And that's the work that we need to do. If we are offering a safe and inclusive services, people will show up, people will identify who they are. So that's sort of where I'm sitting at that point. Although certainly not everyone shares that perspective, but based on my experience, that would be my position there. I do want to touch on belonging a little bit because I think it's tempting to look at our laws and say, well, it's illegal to discriminate based on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and think that that's all we need to do. But as you heard from those people in the video, most of their fears and concerns are not about being legally barred from moving into a long-term care facility or legally denied a service. It's about visibility and belonging. It's about how are people going to accept me? How are people going to treat me? I invite you into this little exercise. So I would like you to think about a time where you were part of a team, where you were on the inside of a group. Doesn't need to be the cool crowd, just an experience where you were on the inside of a group of people. It can be a team, it can be a work setting, it can be anything you want it to be. So hoping that everyone has thought of an experience like that in their past. So I would like you to type in the chat box the kinds of feelings that come up for you when you think about being part of that group. What kinds of feelings come up? Proud, confident, belonging, safe, supported, valued. Yep. Community, accepted, fun, important, myself, cared about. Thank you. Meaningful, comfortable, belonging, togetherness. All right, now I would invite you to think about a time when you were not part of that group, when you had an experience of being on the outside of that team, that crowd, that work experience. So think of a time, and what kinds of feelings then arise from those kinds of experiences. Low self-esteem, sad, isolated, confused, not good enough, rejected, anxious, miserable, outcast, sad, lonely, misfit, frustrated, uncomfortable, fears, tense, tuned out, isolated. So this really, I think, speaks to the human experience that we have, to need to feel like you belong somewhere, that you are valuable, that you are loved, that you are included. And somebody does not have to be part of LGBTQ2+ communities to have this basic need for belonging and these fears around being rejected. They are deep and human. So I really love this quote because I thought it represented the depth of our need for belonging and the consequences for us when we fear rejection. So isolation is a stressful state for both your body and brain, especially when you sense you're being rejected or judged. Your body reads it as a dangerous situation. At these times, your body doesn't have the interest in or energy for building new synaptic connections for learning. It is simply busy saving itself. And this really, I think, speaks to the threat that we experience rejection and lack of belonging as. It's not just about, oh, my feelings got hurt. It really evokes a much deeper sense of our well-being and our ability to survive. So, and I think, particularly when you think about children and their need to belong and have those attachments with people, and how a sense of rejection can be carried in their body and interfere with so many aspects to healthy functioning as they're growing. So, and one of the things that I have found particularly interesting is the research that's happening into the impact of fears of rejection on our neural pathways, and that in fact the same areas of your brain light up and are activated when we encounter social pain and rejection as when we encounter physical pain. So again, I'm just really trying to reinforce how real and important this is for people. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I think this is just interesting for those of you who went into psychology as I did in my undergrad. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs was certainly front and center in looking at human evolution and attachment and human need. And there's been research. There's a guy named Michael Lieberman, and he works at UCLA, and he's been doing research into the pain centers in the slide that I showed you before, but also looking at, above all else, it is the social bonds that are the most essential to our survival. So traditionally, Maslow's hierarchy of needs would say, well, once you've, found your cave and felled a buffalo and, cooked it up, then we're good. Then we can start focusing on our relationships once those physiological basic needs are met and safety needs are met. But this revisioning of the central importance of connection to our overall well-being and sense of safety, I think, is a much more accurate representation of how our survival and evolution and relationships really feed our well-being. So how do we enable belonging? Well, two components: visibility and acceptance are the ways that we create belonging. So in the late 90s, I lived in Maine, and I remember there was a campaign going on there at the time, and it was called Teach Tolerance. And I think that was really meant from a well-intentioned kind of place, but I don't think many of us feel super good about being tolerated. You know, that's not a goal that we aspire to. So really, it's about these two components. This is a 6-minute, I'm aware of the time. This is a 6-minute video, and I'm going to show it because I think it's important. I've had a lot of people who've gone through these workshops say, well, what does care look like? What can I do? Yes, I'm on board. I want to be an ally. What does inclusive care look like? So this video is 6 minutes long, as I said, and it shows 4 different vignettes of situations that LGBTQ2S+ seniors might find themselves in, and not great response by the organization, and then a better way to approach creating inclusive care.
The following are reenactments of situations that may occur at your healthcare facility. For each scenario, there are 2 versions. The first will show a staff member handling a situation in an inappropriate and, well, unhelpful way. The second models mindful and respectful behavior. Here are some possible situations that you may encounter.
Oh, hi, I'm Shoshana. Nice to meet you.
We spoke on the phone.
That's right. Welcome to Linden Groves. Are you 2 brothers?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, let me show you that 1 bedroom I was talking to you about.
Thank you.
Let's try that again.
Oh, hello. Welcome to Linden Groves. I'm Shoshana. Nice to meet you.
We spoke on the phone.
Of course. Hi.
I'm Joe.
Great.
Hey, I like your pen.
Oh, thank you so much.
We're together.
That's wonderful. Hey, let me show you the 1 bedroom that we were talking about. Come on.
Terrific. Thank you.
That was fun, wasn't it?
The holiday party? Yeah.
A lot of families this year. Did you see Marlene's grandkids? They were the cutest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ever have a husband or any kids of your own? Carmen, did you?
I didn't go that route.
I'm just gonna get some of these dishes done.
Let's try that again.
That was fun, wasn't it?
The holiday party? Yeah.
Carmen, tell me about when you were younger. Did you have a partner?
Actually, I did.
I would love to see some photos, or if you have any.
Okay. Let's see. She died about 4 years ago.
You must have loved her a lot.
I did. I did.
Yes? Who are you?
I'm here to help you get dressed today, Miss Johnson.
Linda usually does that.
Linda's not here today, but it's okay. I'm happy to help. Here, let me help you take...
I think I got it.
It's okay. It's nothing I haven't seen before. Let's just take off your pants. Oh, I didn't expect to see that.
It's okay.
Your file said female.
Let's try that again.
Hi there.
Who are you?
I'm Karen. I'm here to help you get dressed today. Is that okay?
Linda usually does that.
I'm sorry, Miss Johnson. Linda's out sick today, but can I help in any way?
I think I got it.
You sure?
No, I don't think so.
Here. You're all set and looking great.
Thank you.
What are you trying to prove, freak? Stop acting like a weirdo. You're scaring people.
I'm not a weirdo. Leave me alone.
You think it's normal to dress like that?
Yes, actually.
Oh, really?
Billy, come on. Give the guy a break. He's just different.
Let's try that again. What are you trying to prove, freak? Stop acting like a weirdo. You're scaring people.
I'm not a weirdo. Leave me alone.
You think it's normal to dress like that?
Yes, actually.
Oh, really?
Billy, that's not cool. Lee is a human being just like anyone with feelings and deserves respect. Can you come with me for a minute? Billy, please remember our rules. No one gets bullied or disrespected, okay?
But
Lee is entitled to express her gender just like you. Now, I know this won't happen again, but I have to let the director know what just happened so it's in your file. We protect everyone here. You okay?
I'm okay.
I'm so sorry that happened, Lee, but I'm going to let the director know, and please don't hesitate to talk with her yourself about this, or if it ever happens again. It's important to us that you feel safe here.
Thank you for that.
So again, I would invite you and encourage you to talk about what you saw in those videos in the small groups you ran in with colleagues, because I think that there's a lot to unpack in there. One of the things that I really appreciate about this series of videos is that it shows some of the ways that we can really easily make some significant changes or changes that are going to have a significant impact for LGBTQ2S+ seniors coming into your care facility or into your program. Because, you know, interestingly enough, we're also not just dealing with making sure that our staff and that we show up in ways that are safe and inclusive, but oftentimes other seniors who may be participating in the program who grew up in decades past with some fairly homophobic or transphobic kinds of belief systems. And so how do we navigate that? It's certainly also come up, what about we're dealing with people with cognitive impairments, and how do we navigate those complex situations? And my response to that is respond as if the person understands, because you're setting an example and you don't know who's watching. And it's also the energy that you're bringing to that interaction that is going to translate on some level as well. So, you know, and just for our own humanity and our own way that we try to show up and provide good care, I think that it's important to do, even though we might not be sure what the cognitive capacity of the people in the situation that we're dealing with. But there's so much in there that I think can be helpful. That is from Safe and Visible, Creating a Care Facility Welcoming to LGBT Seniors, and it's in the resource list that you will get. The full video is 30 minutes. So again, invite you as a staff group to dig in and to review some of that as well. So again, I touched on this briefly. In my experience, there's a lot of this holding on to this idea that I don't see difference, I don't see color, I don't need to know your sexual orientation or gender identity in order to provide you good care. And I disagree with that. I think ultimately we need to know and understand who people are, and we need to be sensitive to those things that make somebody different and that impact their lived experiences and will impact the relationship that they're able to have and show up with you. So we do need to understand and know who people are. And again, treating everybody the same, not our goal. So I have included also in your handouts a sheet called Where I'm At. And it really helps dig into some privileges that we might not be aware that we're carrying. That's the thing about privilege, is when we have that privilege, we're not necessarily tuned into the way that people experience not having that privilege. And so, you know, that's our individual work to understand what it means. And often it's not about whether or not you're a nice person. It's about the structures and systems that we've built that privilege and center some people and exclude and disempower others. So I would again invite you to take this worksheet that I've offered you, because it really helps you uncover some belief systems and values that you may not even realize that you're carrying. I remember I was particularly struck by one of the items on that sheet about where I'm at that said, I would be surprised to meet a lesbian Muslim woman wearing a hijab. And I just thought, yes, I would. And that really gave me the opportunity to figure out what beliefs and values I was carrying around that I wasn't even aware of. So this is going beyond, well, as long as I don't call someone a fag, then I'm good. Again, it's not about being a nice person. It's not about you know, whether or not you're overtly mean to somebody. You know, that's the foundational level. No, we don't want overt meanness, but we also really want to do that self-reflection work and uncover some of the beliefs and values that we're carrying that will influence and impact how we show up and how we engage with people. So a couple of special considerations just as we come to our close to the end of our session. LGBTQ2S plus seniors are both resilient and at risk. If you spend any time with LGBTQ2S plus seniors, you will see that they are a resilient, funny, strong, connected bunch of people who are just lovely and wonderful. And so through those experiences of marginalization and rejection, they have built some amazing resilience and community as well. So LGBTQ2S plus seniors have, there are health disparities that we need to be aware of, higher rates of disability, cardiovascular disease, depression, and social isolation that can come with those experiences of marginalization and rejection. So just being aware that those health disparities exist and what some of the underlying causes may be. Financial insecurity is a big one, again, especially for trans folks who may have had more difficulty getting and maintaining employment, but they haven't had access to some of those benefits that heterosexual couples have had historically. And they're at slightly increased risk of elder abuse because of the fears of being outed, because of not having those natural, well, kids to be aware of whether or not mom or dad is, or mom or mom is getting financially fleeced in some way or at risk of some kind of scam. So there just isn't the people around to provide the protections ultimately. And so they may be at risk because of being isolated as well. So what do we do? So we're coming to our end. Here's a very quick do's and don'ts list. Don't assume everyone is heterosexual and cisgender. I am as guilty of that as anybody else, weirdly. I still do it, but just trying to make that front and center when you're meeting somebody, just a reminder. And using neutral language, you saw the difference that made for Carmen, for the carer who said, you know, did you have somebody special in your life? You know, who's important to you? Those kinds of questions can be so valuable in demonstrating to the person that you're not making assumption that they're straight or cisgender or transgender. I got that mixed up for a second. That you're not making assumptions about who they are. And if you don't know, ask, but just making space for people to show up as who they are is incredible. Because I think Carmen always gets me, because every LGBTQ2S plus person has been in the situation a million times where they have to make a decision about coming out, where somebody has made an assumption, you feel invisible, and all of those questions pop up around, oh, do I do it this time? You know, what's the impact going to be? What's the fallout going to be? Who is this person? It's the not knowing, because people don't walk around generally, with a big sign on their hat or their forehead that says, I don't like gay people. So it's just the not knowing, because people have had so many experiences of being hurt or marginalized or discriminated against, or know people who were, that it's that, am I going to take that risk in the situation? And so there's things that we can do to make that risk feel smaller. So engage in reflective practice and explore assumptions. I hope I've given you some invitations and opportunities to do that. Learn about the health disparities and the healthcare needs of LGBTQ2+ folks in your community. Challenge homophobia when you see it. Be an ally, and figure out ways to increase visibility and representation. Although before you post rainbow flags or wear rainbow lanyards or pins, make sure that you've done some work to actually be an ally and a safe person, because it can be quite harmful if we present ourselves as something that we're not. So that is, and for those of you who are familiar with BC Care Providers Association, it's an organization that deals with all the non-health authority related or non-health authority designated facilities. I offer them criteria to identify themselves as a LGBTQ2S friendly organization, you know, and that means a lot to people who are looking for care and people who are considering, you know, moving into your facility. So there's things that you can do around education, around looking at your systems and processes, around visible statements of support, around, you know, making sure that your organization addresses any incidents that occur, like with Lee. So there's just things that you can do to create a more welcoming and inclusive space. I've developed a toolkit that gives you some ideas, and that toolkit is available online. Again, there's a link to it on your resources sheet. And we've come to the end, and it's 11:06. So I would really hope that we have a little bit of time to answer any pressing questions that come up. I think Barb has been monitoring some of the Q&A functions, or people can post questions in the chat box if they would like.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you also, Jane. That was super informative. I learned a lot. And those last few slides, I think, would be really terrific to, you know, just use them and create a checklist that every organization should have. While we're waiting for questions, Nicole, if you want to advance to the next slide, this one here, just a reminder that the webinar will be available in the next day or two on Healthy Aging Core, but that there's also a lot of other resources. We've been loading a lot of the ones that Nicole has recommended, as well as others that we previously had there. And on the next slide, you will see some of them that are there, and all you have to do is you can search by keyword. If you go into the that keyword blank area up on the left and just type in LGBT or LGBTQ2, and you'll get a lot of resources coming up from a variety of different providers, different organizations, and there's toolkits, there's fact sheets, etc. And you can also search by category or subject area. And as I mentioned, for webinars, you can just type in webinar to locate this and all of the other webinars. You can also look under the partner organizations that you link to from the homepage of CORE. That lists a lot of different organizations, including community. So those are ways to access the resources. I see one question. How do you simply, upon an intake to any program, ask someone their identity and orientation? Nicole?
Generally, you don't. My position on that is that if we do a good job creating a space for people to feel safe to come out, they will. So, you know, it is those things like in the welcome package, for example, our organization, the long-term care facilities, has redesigned their welcome package to make an explicit statement about inclusion and safety for LGBTQ2S+ people. So I think there's a number of different things that organizations can do. I mean, explicitly including sexual orientation and gender identity in their philosophies of care or statements of anti-discrimination, or, showing up like Shoshana did with her pin. Those kinds of ways that we say to people, this is a safe space for you, then people are going to know that they are able to identify who they are. So I think that we need to respect their timetables, but just if we create the space, they will come out.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Also looking at the chat box, there's a couple of questions and comments. Sherry Baker points out that there's also relevant resources on the BCCRN website, which you can go to directly or again, access from the partner organization page from CORE. And Janet has asked if the resource sheet and toolkit is on the Healthy Aging CORE website, and I believe it's already been posted. If not, it will be posted in the next few minutes, I'm sure.
Well, also, sorry, one more thing. The toolkit right now is available through the BC Care Aging with Pride website. We're just in the process of revamping our intranet page, so hopefully the toolkit that I developed will be available on the Island Health website at some point soon too. But right now it's through the Aging with Pride Care Association website.
And we'll make sure to link to them. Jane has a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. It was a very interesting and it's a difficult question, but one of the dilemmas we're really working on now, and the census folks have just recently added the question to offer you the opportunity to be not just either male or female, but specify something else in your own words. They've left it very open, which I think is good, because one of the issues we have is we all need to have more data. And I know that the academics at SFU, UVic, UBC, wherever they are, would love to have more data. So the more welcoming and open we are to hear from people who they are, the more we're going to be able to actually serve people in a way that makes sense. That really is inclusive and affirming. Right.
That's
now,
a really good. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's a really good point, Jane. And one of the ways that we create that openness and opportunities to self-identify is when we give people options in their intake paperwork about their gender identity. So that's a great example.
Great. There's another question here in the chat box from Jane. Are there any senior facilities or homes that center on queer residents for their primary resident population?
Not in BC. There's one in that I'm aware of. There's one in Toronto, Fudger House it's called, but I don't think that there's any that specifically cater to LGBTQ2S+, but certainly asking that question, if somebody is interested in it, ask the site director if they've had any LGBTQ2S+ training or what they do to create a more inclusive environment, are wonderful questions.
If we go to the supported living part, they're in I'm darned if I'm going to remember the name, but downtown in the West End of Vancouver, there is a residential site which has a very, very large proportion of LGBTQ folks there, and a special counsel and a variety of things. So if you look around outside the actual, as soon as you move into either assisted living or long-term care, you can find places that are friendly to, or mostly, if you don't feel comfortable with LGBTQ, you wouldn't go there.
There's another question about LGBTQ2+ versus 2S+. I just shortened it. The 2 stands for Two-Spirit. So the 2S stands for Two-Spirit, but I just put a 2 there to shorten the acronym.
Great, thanks, Nicole. And we have one more question in the question box. Do you have any suggestions on how can we advertise our services so that we're sure to reach LGBTQ2+ seniors so that they know we're available to support them?
I would look to see what local LGBTQ2S+ organizations might exist. Like in Victoria, I know there's a Lesbian Senior Care Society, there's Prime Timers, there's a organization called Silver Threads, which now has a Rainbow Threads subgroup. And so it's looking for what are the resources in the community that already support LGBTQ2S+ seniors, and then tell them that you'd like to come and talk to their group about your services, or advertise on local community boards or in local publications, things like that.
Great, and I think that's it for all of the questions. We really appreciate you both presenting today. As I said, that was really informative and I learned a lot, and judging from all of the comments in the chat box, other participants did as well. So again, thank you. And thanks to all of the participants who joined us today for this really valuable webinar. Really great to see such a good turnout in the middle of summer when so many people are on vacation. So stay tuned to upcoming healthy aging newsletters for upcoming webinars. We should be having quite a few listed for our fall schedule in next week's edition. And again, thank you so much. And you'll find the webinar and other resources available on CORE. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.